So when we came up with this topic in our worship planning meetings, one of the first stories that really came to my mind, and which always comes to my mind when I hear of the topic of dealing with toxic people, is this exact story, the story of David and Saul. And this is what I read for you guys earlier is really just a small snippet of the entirety of their relationship and what kind of went on between them. The reason why I think of this is that the Bible does have specific commandments and stuff that can really deal with this topic. Generally, they go something like this. Don't get involved with people who are toxic because they're going to, affect you in a bad way. But what I find that is the reality is, as long as you're dealing with people, you're going to at some point encounter somebody who is toxic. And sometimes it's easy to deal with them. You can just, not deal with them. There's somebody maybe that you just randomly run into online or, in a video game and whatever. And you can just very simply block them, never listen to them again. It's much more different when the individual in question is either a family member, a friend, somebody who you feel like you really can't, distance yourself from in that manner. And that is really where this story, that's really what the story deals with. David, for those of you who are unaware, David, after he slayed Goliath, he was rising in kind of his stardom, Saul got jealous of him. But also, at the same sort of time, David married Saul's youngest daughter. So King Saul, is David's father-in-law. So he can't really get rid of him because, he's married to the guy's daughter. It's his in-law. And beyond that, there's other sort of elements that are going into this as well. David, viewed, as did many individuals, Saul as being God's anointed. And so he felt a calling to help him in his life and those sorts of things. But as he was having success and people were praising him for his success, Saul got jealous and we get scenes like this. Now, what I find interesting within this entire story within Samuel, which I would very much encourage you all to go out there and read, is that David, despite having opportunities to do sort of the similar things, to attempt to take Saul's life like he did in, chapter 19 with him, he didn't. There's a scene later on where David is in hiding, and is kind of, Saul thinks he has him pinned, and he goes to relieve himself in a cave, which happens to be where David is actually hiding. Here's the king all alone. David could easily take him out, and he doesn't. And the reason is that David was following kind of this, the reason it really comes down to the fact that David, I think very much and very clearly really cared about Saul. And that, I think, is the most difficult part whenever you're talking about dealing with somebody who is toxic. And I guess I should define that, and I probably should have done this a little bit earlier. When I'm saying a toxic individual, I generally, very simply would put it as anybody who either tends to drag you into conflict or drags you into drama. They're the individuals you meet in your life who, for whatever reason, they just always something is going on with them. And things are never sort of dealt with in a way where there isn't a bigger problem. Things always escalate with them. And it might not end up with them throwing a literal spear at you, but you can find yourself getting into fights with this individual and seeing other people get into fights. That's the other thing, because sometimes in any type of a relationship, whether it's a friendship, romantic, acquaintanceship, business relationship, you're going to have personalities that clash. But you'll know because these are the individuals who it happens with everybody. And it just always seems to be revolving around them. They themselves might even recognize it and talk about it. And it's a problem. And especially when you care about the individual because, you're seeing this, you see it, it's affecting you, it brings you hurt. and it's causing other problems. And when I talk about this in many ways, I am genuinely speaking from experience from here. There was an individual who was in my life, who I cared about very deeply, and things didn't go well, and I am no longer speaking with that person. But it really did turn out that they were kind of a toxic individual, and it hurt. Everything that went on with that really hurt and really affected me. And it is kind of a situation where I do look back and I kind of think to myself, man, I wish I had followed the advice that was in the Bible of, not getting involved with a person like that, because the signs were there. But you never, when you care about somebody in any way, you tend to miss those things. And so the question, I guess, to ask here is, what do you do when you actually find yourself in that situation? Well, I think David really does give a good example. You do still continue to care. You do try to confront them on this and try to get it to a point where they realize that they're doing things that they maybe shouldn't be doing. And you accept that whatever is going to go on is in God's plan, and, maybe things won't go great. In the case of David and Saul, they never really do reconcile. Saul dies. David, as does Jonathan. And David takes that very hard. But that is where everything ends with that story. There's no more conflict there. But I think if you could ask David, he would definitely say that he would wish that they could have had the relationship they could have potentially had without that happening. In which case they would have no relationship. But I do think that is kind of the big thing is, you still care. You don't escalate the situation, and you try to bring it to their attention. And delicately, of course. I'm not saying, if you have a friend or a significant other or a family member who is prone to outbursts of anger, it might not be a good idea to go up to them and say, you have a problem with anger. Don't bait that type of stuff in there. Go about it in a delicate way. Have conversations. Talk about your own feelings with them. I think that's something very important, because that is, when it comes to toxic individuals, that is one of the things to understand, is that your own feelings ultimately are more important in this case. That is not to say don't care about that person and don't care about their feelings, but if they are causing you, harm, if they are causing you pain emotionally in that way, you have to put your own well-being above theirs in that sort of sense. So that is all I have for you guys today. I hope that you found it useful to you, and I wish you all well. Stay safe, and I will see you next week.